Delaney, thank you. The motion to dismiss Jeffrey Ruppnow's charges could mean that he won't have to go to trial here. That's according to a legal expert that we spoke with. So WMTV contacted this man. This is legal expert Cole Ruby. He's not a part of this case, but we asked him to review these court documents. So Ruppnow's attorney is arguing that the dismissal here of these charges is warranted because the criminal complaint is defective and lacks proper evidence to prove his client is guilty. Ruppnow is charged and ordered to stand trial after his daughter shot and killed 2 people and hurt multiple others using a gun that he owned. Now, if the court rules to dismiss this, Ruppnow could avoid trial. However, Ruby says that the state can then file an appeal to overturn that decision.
If the charges are dismissed, there is no trial. But again, I would expect an appeal no matter who wins the motion to dismiss.
Another important change to this case has to deal with Melissa Ruppnow. That's the shooter's mother. She recently died by an apparent suicide, and that matters because she was listed almost 30 times in the criminal complaint, and both sides could have relied on her testimony.
And the first parents convicted in a school shooting were sentenced to 10 years in prison. This stemmed from a case after a school shooting in Oxford, Michigan. So a judge last year determined that the parents of the shooter missed opportunities that could have prevented their teenage son from having access to a gun and killing 4 students. The judge said that it was not about poor parenting, but about repeated lack of action that could have stopped that shooting.